On the night the wall broke, Alanna Snow dreamed of teeth of ice. They rose from the black of her mind like spears pushed slowly through a frozen river, pale and thin and glittering, and behind them came a sound like 1,000 glass panes shattering at once. In the dream she stood in the God's Wood at Winterfell, bare feet in the snow, and watched the wall crack apart from end to end. Blue light bled from the fissures, blue eyes opened in the ice. The face that leaned close to hers was tall and sharp, the bones of it made of frost, its crown a circlet of hoarfrost and broken shards of steel. "You are late," the thing said without lips moving. The voice was the creak of icebergs, the sigh of winter wind in dead pines. "The world belongs to cold." Alanna tried to answer, but her tongue had frozen to her teeth. She tasted iron and winter. Snowflakes as fine as ashes drifted down and clung to her lashes, and somewhere, very far away, the ravens began to scream. She woke with the sound of wings in her ears. For a moment she did not know where she was. The dream clung like frostbite. She reached blindly, fingers sinking into furs, tracing the familiar ridges of the wolf pelt that served as her blanket. Her small chamber was dark, lit only by a thin line of gray leaking past the shutters. She heard the groan of old timbers, the distant clatter of a portcullis, the mutter of voices in the courtyard below, and the ravens. They were shrieking as if something had set them alight. Alanna pushed herself upright, shaking. Her breath smoked in the air. Winterfell's walls were thick, but they did not keep out the cold entirely. Not in a winter like this. Not with snow piled higher than a man against the inner walls, and the gods only knew what storms hammering the northern marches. She swung her legs out of bed and hissed as her bare feet met the rushes. The familiar ache of cold helped scatter the last of the dream's grip. She dragged on woolen hose and a heavy tunic, tugging her belt tight, and slipped her knife into place almost without thinking. When she opened the shutters, the pre-dawn sky glared back at her, a low ceiling of iron blue cloud. Snow blew in on a sharp wind, stinging her cheeks. She saw Winterfell's courtyards humming like a kicked anthill. Men ran along the battlements. The ravens of the rookery wheeled overhead in a ragged black storm. "7 hells," she muttered, though the Southron oath sat uneasy on her tongue. "What now?" She snatched up her cloak, the rough gray wool patched at shoulder and hem, pulled it around her and darted for the door. The corridor outside stank of tallow and damp wool. Other servants and shadows moved there, too. Sleepy-eyed girls from the kitchens, stable boys half-dressed, a steward snapping orders. Alanna shouldered her way past, bare feet slapping on cold stone. She was no lady to mince along in courtesy. She was bastard, and bastards learned early that if they did not move quickly, they were left behind. Snow bit at her ankles as she crossed the courtyard. She almost collided with old Nan hobbling along with a basket of kindling under one arm. "Mind, girl," the old woman snapped, but her milky eyes were wide, troubled. "Ravens don't cry like that for nothing. Bad tidings on the wing. Bad and black. I feel it in my bones." Alanna half-turned, heart thudding. "From the wall. Where else?" Old Nan spat into the snow. "It begins where it always begins. It ends where it once did not." "What ends?" Alanna asked, but old Nan only hobbled away, muttering to herself, bits of old tales tangled with prayer. The rookery sat high in the broken tower, a round of crumbling stone like a cracked tooth above the rest of Winterfell's walls. The climb left Alanna breathless, legs burning, but she hardly noticed. The ravens screamed louder as she climbed, black shadows flapping past the arrow slits. When she burst through the rookery door, the maester was already there. Maester Luwin was not the man who would wear that chain in later tales. He was younger, his back not yet bowed by years and his hair only just beginning to silver at the temples. His name was Maester Harrod, and he swore that once he had studied in Old Town where the air smelled of salt and orange blossom instead of snow and smoke. Here, his gray robes were fur-lined, and his hands were as chapped and red as any stable hands. He stood in the middle of the chaos with his arms raised, as if he might physically push the birds back. Ravens clogged the rafters, the perches, every available space of beam and rope. They hopped and flapped, feathers flying. Their eyes were black and bright. Their beaks snapped with agitation. "Back! Off! You will have your turn," Herod bellowed. He turned at the sound of Alanna's arrival, beads of condensation clinging to his beard. "You girl, help me, for the love of the old gods and the new." She threw herself into it without question. Together they shoved and cajoled the birds aside, untangling leather jesses, prying tiny scrolls from scabbed legs. Alanna's hands were quickly scored with nips and scratches. The ravens were frantic, and their fear was contagious. Crawled up her arms like frost. There were many ravens, far more than there should have been from one place. Alanna recognized the bells and brass of Winterfell's own, the subtle gray of White Harbor, the unadorned black of smaller holds. But it was the ravens with the pale blue rings that Herod seized first, and it was their leg-scratched scrolls that he tore open with shaking fingers. Alanna saw the mark stamped at the bottom of the first note, the black shield and 8-pointed star of the Night's Watch. Herod's lips moved soundlessly as he read. The color leached from his face. Without wiping the ink from his fingers, he grabbed another raven, then another, cracking wax and reading with growing horror. "What is it?" Alanna demanded. The ravens were calmer now that their burdens were gone, as if attention had slid off their narrow shoulders. They settled in the rafters, watching with unreadable black eyes. Alanna wanted to snatch the scroll out of Herod's hands. "Maester, what?" "Go to the Lord," Herod said hoarsely, not looking at her. "Now, find Lord Brandon and tell him the wall has fallen." Alanna stared. For a heartbeat she thought she had misheard him. "Fallen? Breached?" Herod snapped, as if the word might be better somehow. "Broken. It matters little how we name disaster. It is done. Go." She went. Lord Brandon Stark was in the practice yard with his sons when she found him. Snow packed the yard to knee-height where the servants had not yet shoveled it aside. Its surface was churned into gray slush by boots and hooves and the sweeping arcs of practice swords. The Winterfell guards had been drilling since first light. Steel clanged on steel. Men grunted. A shield splintered with a hollow crack as Alanna came out of the archway. Two boys fought in the center of the yard. Cregan and Torrin, Lord Brandon's heirs. Cregan was the elder by 2 years and taller by a head, all long limbs and wolfish grace, his dark hair pulled back in a rough tail. Torrin was shorter, stockier, face flushed, jaw clenched with stubborn determination. Both wore padded armor over boiled leather, wooden practice swords in their hands. "Again," Brandon called as Torrin slipped and went down onto his back. His voice carried across the yard, the sound of a man used to being obeyed. Torrin groaned, rolled, and pushed himself up, shaking snow from his collar. "7 bloody." Brandon's eyebrow twitched. "Mind that tongue, boy." Again. Cregan flashed a quick, sharp grin at his brother and moved in, wooden blade whistling toward Torrin's ribs. "Lord Stark," Alanna shouted, breath fogging in front of her. "My lord." Cregan's swing faltered. Torrin took advantage to jam his shoulder into his brother's chest and send them both sprawling. Guards laughed. Someone muttered how Cregan had deserved that for his smirk. Brandon held up a hand. The laughing died at once as he turned toward Alanna. He looked, she thought, not for the first time, every inch the man tale singers loved. Broad-shouldered, hard-faced, hair black as a raven's wing tumbled to his shoulders. Ice hung at his hip. The great sword passed from Stark to Stark since the first of them had led men south through the snows. He wore no cloak despite the cold, only a plain wool tunic under thick leathers. The stark gray direwolf was stitched on his breast, leaning and snarling. "Alanna," he said, "not snow, never snow." He was not a man given to smiles, but the few lines which bracketed his mouth softened for a heartbeat. "You're up early." "The ravens, my lord," she said, panting. "From the wall, from Eastwatch and Castle Black both. Maester Herod says." Saying it aloud made her tongue clumsy. He says the wall has fallen. Silence slammed into the yard like a mailed fist. Even the wind seemed to pause. Torin pushed himself upright, snow clinging to his hair. "That isn't funny," he said, half to her, half to his father. Brandon's eyes, gray as winter skies, did not move from Alana's face. "Tell me." So she did, stumbling over the words but not losing their meaning. Ravens, black and blue ringed, a dozen, more. The maester's pallor and shaking hands. His flat, bleak tone as he spoke of broken stone and dead brothers, of cold-made flesh walking. Somewhere in the telling her voice steadied. The dream crawled at the edge of her memory, but she did not speak of that. Brandon's face might have been carved from the same stone as Winterfell's walls. When she finished, he closed his eyes for a moment. Just one. Then he turned to his sons. "Cregan, Torin, with me, armor on." His gaze flicked to the men around the yard. "Ser Harl, Ser Wendell, you as well. Sound the horns. Wake every man who can hold a spear. No, don't gawk at me like fish. Move." Winterfell leaped to obey. The great hall filled quickly. Word traveled faster than snowmelt. Guards who had been on the walls moments before now stamped their feet on the flagstones, shaking snow from their cloaks. Stewards stood on benches to be heard, rattling off counts of grain stores, salted meat, candles. House bannermen rushed in, breathing clouds, bringing tales of their own ravens and their own fears. The Karstarks had had no birds from the Shadow Tower in over a fortnight. The Umbers said the woods beyond Last Hearth had grown unnaturally quiet, as if some huge hand had smothered all sound. Alana had seen the great hall packed for harvest feasts before. She had never seen it like this. No music, no ale poured, no laughter. Only brittle voices and the creak of leather, the shuffle of boots, the occasional wail from a forgotten child. On the dais beneath the carved stone direwolves, Lord Brandon sat in the high seat of Winterfell with his sons to either side. Maester Harrod hovered at his elbow, the blue-ringed scrolls spread on the table before them like a spilled hand of ill-favored cards. Alana took her place against the wall with the other servants and lesser kin, her heart a tight cold knot in her chest. "I will read it again," Harrod said, though he had already read the Watch's message twice. "So there is no confusion or misremembering." His voice was rough with parchment and sleeplessness. "To Lord Brandon Stark, Warden of the North. The wall is breached. We do not yet know by what means. The ice cracked at Eastwatch by the sea, and from its wound came the dead in their thousands. The first assault fell on Eastwatch. Brother Ethan reports the castle taken, its defenders fallen and risen against us. Lord Commander Malador called for retreat to Castle Black, but the dead came on aye, and a storm that did not move. The sky is full of unnatural lights, ghost fires. We have sent birds to every lord we can name. Send aid if you are able. If we fall, there will be naught between these things and your lands but snow. In the name of the Night's Watch, sworn to guard the realms of men, Ser Yora of Bear Island, First Ranger." Harrod rolled the parchment between his fingers, as if he could crush its words away. "We have had no bird from Castle Black since this was written. The ink is 3 days dry." A fearful murmur rippled through the hall. Brandon raised his hand and it cut off. "You all know the tales," he said. His voice was quieter than Alana expected. That made it carry more, not less. "You have heard your grannies mutter of the long night. You have frightened your children with talk of white shadows in the forest. Our words are not empty. Winter does come. It always comes. Now the things it carries have stepped out of story." He let that sit with them a moment. His fingers tapped, once, on the arm of his chair, a small, restless gesture that only those who watched him closely would note. "We have a choice," Brandon went on. "We can pretend these birds are the dying panic of frightened men. We can say the wall stands, it has always stood, it will always stand. We can say this is beyond my walls, beyond my lands, beyond my duties. Or we can remember we are Starks, and the North does not turn its back on its own." A rumble of approval answered him, low and fierce. "My lord," said Torin, leaning forward despite himself. "We must ride. Take every man we can spare. Send word to White Harbor and Carhold and Last Hearth. If we move quickly." Brandon's gaze had already turned toward the map spread on the table. The north was a smear of white and gray, the wall a thin blue line across its crown. Alanna saw his jaw clench. "If we move quickly," he murmured. "We can die quickly, The hall went still again. "We do not know how many these things have risen," Brandon said. "We know only that they took Eastwatch and then Castle Black in less than 3 days. The wall did not merely fall, it was broken, and men who fall to them rise. Every soldier they kill becomes another blade in their hand." He looked up. "If we send 10,000 men and they fall, we give them 10,000 more. If we send our strength piecemeal, house by house, holdfast by holdfast, we will fall as reeds before a flood. The north will be lost." "My lord," Lord Moore's Umber protested, his beard bristling. "We cannot sit and wait while the dead march." "No," Brandon agreed, "we cannot, which is why I will not be marching alone." The bannermen exchanged confused glances. Cregan's brows drew together. "Father," Brandon rested his hand on Ice's pommel. The wolf-head hilt gleamed dully in the hall's thin light. "The north is not enough," he said. "Not for this. We need more men than the north holds. More steel, more grain. We need all Westeros." He let that sink in. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a man snorted disbelief before his neighbor elbowed him quiet. "The kings of winter have guarded this land since there were kings at all," Brandon said. "Once, my forefather led the first men against the children and the giants and carved us out a home. Later, when the Undulls came, the Starks held the neck and kept them from drowning us in their sevenfold faith. Now something worse than men is coming. Worse even than Undulls. This enemy does not pray. It does not parley. It will not stop. Tell me true, do you believe the King of the Rock will come racing to our aid because we asked nicely? Will the Storm King cross half a continent in snow at a raven's plea?" There was a bitter chuckle from somewhere near the dais. "The Storm King won't cross his own bloody yard without a dozen fires and a fur-lined cloak. That is why," Brandon said calmly. "I will not ask." Silence again. Thick, appalled this time. "You mean to march south?" Lord Moore's Umbers sputtered. "Now, when the dead are in the north?" "I mean to march south," Brandon said. "I mean to stand in the halls of King Christopher Mudd of the rivers and hills, in the holdfast of the Storm King, in the court of the Garden King, and lay this truth before them. I mean to say, you will come, or you will be the first to be thrown on the pyre when the dead reach your lands." He leaned forward, wolf-gray eyes sweeping the hall. "But I will not go as a beggar. I will go as the man who holds the neck. As the man who can open the north and let the dead walk or hold them back with every stone of Moat Cailin. I will go as Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, and more if I must." "You speak of war with living men," said Lady Arya Karstark sharply. Her hair was white as snow, her face lined but fierce. "When the dead are at our door. I speak of forcing men to see what is at theirs," Brandon shot back. "If I must put a sword to their throats to make them turn north, so be it. Better a few dozen living heads roll now than the heads of all our people later, pulled from their graves by cold hands." "They will not yield their crowns easily," muttered Ser Wendell Manderly, touching the hilt of his own sword as if in reassurance. "Kings do not like being told what they must do." "Then they may keep their crowns," Brandon said, "so long as they march. I care little whose sigil flies over what tower, so long as the men beneath it stand shoulder to shoulder when the dead come. But they will stand. I swear it by the heart tree and ice both." His words sent a shiver up Alanna's spine. Only later would men of letters note that this might have been the first time he foresaw his own crown. At the time, it only sounded like cold, ironclad intent. "Who will hold the north while you go south?" Lady Arya demanded. "If you damn the wall as lost, the next shield is us." Brandon turned. His gaze settled on his eldest son. "Cregan will guard the north in my stead. Torin will ride with me. Cregan swallowed. Alanna saw his throat bob. He was 17, maybe, and trying not to look it. Father, he began and stopped, jaw working. You mean to go yourself? You would trust this to another? Brandon asked softly. Will you sit here in Winterfell and hope some Southron lord argues our cause as his own? No. If anyone will make them see, it must be me. I know the stakes. He looked over the heads of his bannermen and, for a moment, his gaze seemed to meet Alanna's through the press. As if he remembered the bastard girl he had taken in from a snowdrift 10 years ago and set to serving in his hall. As if he remembered the dreams she had blurted to him in childish fear, long ago, dreams of cold things and broken stone. As if those dreams whispered now at the edges of his thoughts. We have little time, Brandon said. The ravens fly faster than we can ride, but only just. By the time we reach the neck, the dead may already be at the shivering forest. We leave within 3 days. Herod, send birds to Moat Cailin and White Harbor. Tell them to prepare the way. Lord Moors, you will send half your strength to the last river and keep the other half at Last Hearth. Lady Ara, he began to assign, to command, to spin lines of duty and defense like a web. Men's faces hardened, fear channeled into anger and purpose. The hall that had rung with silence now buzzed, low and intent. Alanna stayed where she was, pressed back against the stone, her heart hammering like a fist in her throat. A Stark leading Northmen to war was nothing new. Song and tale were full of such marches, but never south, never to bend the knee of other kings. Outside, snow fell thicker, whirling in frantic eddies. The ravens watched from the broken tower. Far beyond the wall, in the white wilds, something that had waited for centuries began to move. 3 days later, Alanna rode out of Winterfell in Lord Brandon's train. No one had asked her to come. No one would have thought to. She was a bastard girl with a knack for slipping into shadows and getting in the way. Her place was in the kitchens, the laundry, perhaps one day the steward's ledgers if she proved clever. The road to the south was no place for the like of her. But when she had gone to the Godswood that last night, seeking the comfort of the heart tree's red leaves and white bark, she had seen faces in its eyes. They were not the carved eyes of the weirwood. Those stared, as ever, down into the black of the pool, red sap dried like old blood under their lashes. No, these faces flickered behind and within the carved ones, like phantoms behind thin cloth. A woman with moss tangled in her hair, eyes dark and old. A man whose skin seemed carved from bark, whose veins glowed faintly green. And something else behind them both, deeper, colder, a regard that did not feel entirely human. The woman, if woman she was, had looked at Alanna, and her lips had moved without sound. The words came like a shiver up from the roots into Alanna's bones. He must not go alone. The wind had gusted, snapping the red leaves like banners. Alanna's breath steamed in front of her, heart hammering. I'm no one, she whispered. A bastard. What can I do? The face had tilted, sorrowful and implacable at once. You dream, the weirwood whispered through her. You see, that is more than any king. So she had gone to the stables before dawn with her few belongings bundled in an old cloak. She had bribed Tom the stable boy with a kiss and a half-frozen apple to saddle her pony, a shaggy little roan more suited for pulling carts than carrying knights. She had ridden out at the tail end of Brandon Stark's host, hidden among the baggage train and the cook's carts, hood drawn low and heart in her throat. If any saw her, they took her for what she appeared, another camp follower, a servant attached to some minor lord's household, hardly worth noting. The march south was a blur of cold and gray. They moved quickly, the pace punishing. Brandon had stripped Winterfell's guard to bone, taking with him every rider he could spare and 1,000 foot besides, to show the measure of his resolve when he spoke to kings. Lines of men, horses, carts, and wagons stretched back along the King's Road as far as Alanna could see. Their breath smoked in the air. Their boots beat a steady drum on the frozen dirt. At night, the campfires sprawled across the fields like a second cluster of stars. In those fires, Alanna saw things. Flames that reared and twisted into shapes. a great wall of ice, fracturing. Men like stick figures burning blue, a river gone black and still as if frozen. But when she leaned closer, she saw that what moved below the surface was not water at all, but hands. On the 5th night, she dreamed of the dead for the first time. She was back at Winterfell, running barefoot through drifting snow. The sky roared with silence. The stars were motionless, pinpricks of white on an endless black dome. When she looked closer, she saw that they were not stars at all, but eyes. There were no torches on the walls, no men at the gate, only a thin wind that stank of iron and rot. She found Cregan in the yard, kneeling by the heart tree of the small godswood as if he had fallen there. His lips moved as if in prayer, but when she touched his shoulder he toppled bonelessly, and his eyes were full of frost. He rose without using his hands. His mouth opened, and snow poured out. Alanna woke with a scream lodged so tightly in her throat it scarcely escaped. Her hands were dug into the furs, knuckles white. Beside her in the tent, 3 other camp girls snored or muttered or shifted. No one else seemed disturbed. She pressed shaking fingers to her eyes until stars burst behind them. The dream clung like a ragged veil. She could not shake the taste of iron. When her breath had slowed, she crept out into the cold. The camp lay under a bowl of stars. Men huddled in their cloaks around the dying embers of fires. The snorts and stamp of horses drifted from the picket lines. Not far away, she saw the larger, better-lit tent where Lord Brandon and his officers slept, if they slept at all. She had meant only to breathe, to walk the stiff fear out of her legs. Instead, she found herself skirting the edge of the officers' circle, drawn by a low murmur of voices like a moth to heat. The tent flap was half open. A thin wash of lamplight spilled onto the snow. "My lord," someone was saying inside. A man with a deep, gravelly voice Alanna did not recognize. "You must know this will not go unchallenged. Kings do not kneel easily." "I know," Brandon's voice, rough with fatigue but steady. "I've no intention of demanding kneeling for kneeling's sake. I'll take swords instead. Let them keep their damned crowns so long as they march. And if they do not?" The man's tone carried the roughness of the North, but there was an edge in it, like a whetstone on iron. "If the Storm King laughs in your face and sends you home to freeze, then he will be the first to learn how winter bites in the South," Brandon said. "But I hope it won't come to that. Men are stubborn, but they like living. You place a heavy stake on hope. I place it on fear." Brandon's chair creaked. Alanna pictured him leaning forward, elbows on knees. "We have something the old tales did not. Ravens. Proof. I will not be telling them of monsters from Granny's stories. I'll be placing word of broken walls and dead men walking in their hands. If they still choose to wait, then that is choice indeed. But what of the Valyrians?" A third voice cut in smoother, with the faintest curl of a foreign accent. "You send ravens to the Dragon Lords too, yes? If they decide this is their chance to step in as saviors, they may ride north with their dragons and burn the dead, and your north and everything else in their way. Then lay their own claim to this land. And if I do not send to them and we fall," Brandon said, "they will come anyway like a vulture to a corpse. I would rather invite the dragon and set a place for it at table than find it tearing my roof away. We need fire as much as steel. Their wars in Essos have made them strangely eager to prove their might. Let them prove it where it will do some good." Alanna's heart thudded. Valyrians, dragons, old Nan's tales muttered of such things, but they were as far away as the sun. A story for summer nights when the wind was soft and the fire low. She had never thought the words of men who turned hills to glass might pluck at the same skein of fate as her own life. "Whatever comes," Brandon said, and the trouble of his sigh gusted through the tent flap, lifting it a finger length. Alanna glimpsed him in profile. Shadowed, eyes rimmed dark with tiredness, ice leaning within arm's reach. A map lay spread before him, held flat by daggers. "This is bigger than any crown or castle, gone. Bigger than any of us." So the gravelly voice belonged to Gone. Then, Gone mud, she guessed, from the rivers and hills. one of the king's sons, sent north as a token last year, with a retinue of fierce river knights who had scowled at everything and everyone they saw. Someone had said he was the third son, the one no one quite knew what to do with. Alanna had seen him in Winterfell's hall once or twice, broad-shouldered, brown-haired, with a blunt, heavy-featured face rescued from plainness by a certain dry humor in his eyes. He had looked both wary and fascinated by the north, like a man walking on a frozen lake unsure how thick the ice was under his feet. Now his voice was quieter. "Bigger than your house, you mean?" Brandon did not answer at once. "I mean," he said at last, "that if we fail, no one will be left to remember the names of our houses at all." Alanna backed away. The snow squeaked under her boots. She pulled her cloak tighter around her, feeling suddenly smaller than she ever had in her life. A single drifting flake in a storm centuries in the making. Sleep came only in fits after that. When she did drift off, the dreams pounced, flickering and sharp. She dreamed of a hall she had never seen, long and low, its walls made of stone the color of honey. Men sat at a table there, their garments bright with southern dyes. The man at the head wore a copper crown of many spikes and drummed his fingers on the table as Brandon Stark strode in, snow still dusting his shoulders, ice at his back. "You must be mad," the crowned man said in Alanna's dream ears, and she knew him without being told. This was Tristopher Mudd, king of the rivers and hills, whose forebears had carved their kingdom out of the marshy tangle between the Trident's forks. "The tales you bring north are enough to make babes scream. And you want my men to march into that cold? For what? To freeze? To live?" Brandon said simply. The conversation spiraled from there, flaring and cooling, full of hard words and harder truths. Alanna watched unseen from some corner, hovering near the hearth. It did not go as badly as it might have, though it went badly enough. Tristopher laughed at first, until Brandon had Maester Harrod read the words of the watch aloud and laid before them, like a grim feast, the reports from small holds nearer the wall. Tales of whole villages disappearing, of nights gone on and on without dawn, of the northern lights writhing like a dragon's spine across the sky. Tristopher's laughter died. Fear replaced it, and with fear, anger. He did not refuse to march, but he did not swear himself to Brandon either. "We will ride to your aid as allies," he said, jabbing a finger at the map. "I will send you half my spears and as many bowmen. But I bend no knee. I keep my crown. I bow to no wolf. I have not asked you to," Brandon said with patient iron. "Not yet." Alanna woke with the impression of Gawn Mudd's eyes on her. Not in the dream, but here, in the thin canvas darkness of the tent. As if, somehow, he had sensed her watching. The next day, when they rode into the Riverlands for true, she saw him for the first time in the waking world. Tristopher's middle son rode a rangy bay with the easy seat of one born to the saddle. He wore a cloak of muddy green, a sword at his hip, a helm swinging from his saddle. His jaw was shaded with the beginnings of a beard, and his breath smoked around his words as he talked quietly with Lord Brandon. Alanna kept her distance, but she watched. Gawn did not look much like a prince, she thought. He laughed too easily for that. When a northern rider cursed at the cold, Gawn only grinned and said, "What? You don't like the knife in your lungs every time you breathe? I thought that was how you wolves sharpen your teeth." The Northman gave him a baleful look. Gawn winked. When they made camp that night near a half-frozen stream, Alanna found herself at the edge of the officer's fire as she fetched water for the kitchen. Their voices drifted over the crackle of flames. "The Storm King will be harder," Gawn was saying. "He likes to pretend no one to the north of the Blackwater exists at all. You come to him telling tales of ice demons and walking corpses." "It is the truth," Brandon said. "I know it is. I've seen the ravens. Gods, I've seen a man with frost in his eyes who should have been dead twice over. I'll have nightmares enough of that for 10 lifetimes. But I'm telling you how he will hear it. He'll say it's a trick, a northern ruse to get him to bleed his strength for you. He hates the north almost as much as he loves hearing his own name." Brandon poked at the fire with a stick, sparks jumping. "Then I will bring him something that does not lie. What, a corpse? Gon snorted. Drag one down bound in chains and let it loose in his hall? That's a tale to frighten minstrels, not a plan. Brandon's silence was sharper than words. Gon's laughter stuttered and stopped. You can't be serious. What is one corpse to a hall full of lords who must be made to understand? Brandon asked quietly. If they will not take ravens and words and my own oaths as proof, perhaps they will listen to cold fingers around their throats. You're proposing to bring one of those things alive. Una live, whatever they are. Yes, by all 7 bloody hells, Gon muttered. You Starks are madder than the tales say. Madness, Brandon said, would be pretending this can be done gently. Alana's water slopped over her hands, scalding hot. She had seen in her dreams enough to know the risk of what he proposed, and the necessity. If that was what it took to wake kings, she thought, then perhaps a little madness was called for. They rode on. The land changed. The white vastness of the north gave way, slowly, to patchy snow and dead grass. Trees thickened, clutching skeletal branches at the sky. Rivers cut black lines across the gray, edged with glass. Villages huddled under the weight of the lowering clouds, smoke rising straight up from their chimneys. More ravens flew overhead. Some came north, some went south. All seemed to be flying harder, their wings beating as if the air had grown thick and difficult to push through. At Moat Cailin, Brandon's host swelled, taking in more men, more carts, more fear. The neck, with its reek of salt and rot, its stunted trees and spear towers, gave Alana her first true sense of how far from home she had come. Here, men moved through waist-deep water with ease, and women wore cloaks of woven moss. Crannogmen watched from the reeds, eyes painted green, spears tipped with dragonglass gleamed from secrets older than stone. How do you stand the stench? Gon asked at one camp, his nose wrinkled. You get used to anything, Brandon said, even war. How comforting. They crossed the causeway, slipped past ancient towers, and emerged into the south. Alana had never seen anything like it. Even in the grip of this unnatural winter, the land below the neck seemed a different country. The air smelled less of iron, more of mud and wood smoke. The snow lay thinner on the ground. In some places the earth showed brown through the white. Great, bare-limbed trees stretched toward the dull sky. The King's Road, better maintained here, ran straight as an arrow toward the horizon. They passed fields gone fallow, their crops killed by the early frost. Men watched from the doorways of stone farmhouses, faces wary and pinched. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts. Some made signs with their fingers as the northern host passed, warding off evil. Whether they meant to ward off the strangers or the thing the strangers rode against, Alana could not say. Outside a town called Hagsmire, they saw their first runaway. He came stumbling out of the marsh beside the road, clothes ragged, face bruised with cold and hunger. He threw himself onto the ground before Brandon's horse, clutching at the stirrup. "Please," he gasped, his breath hitched, steam bursting from his mouth. "Please, my lord, you must help us." Brandon reined in, hand tightening on the reins. "Get him up," he said, and one of the guards hauled the man to his feet. "Who are you?" Gon asked, frowning. His Riverland's accent softened his vowels. "Jared, my lord, Jared Tanner from up near the Fever River." His teeth chattered audibly. There was cold worse than any winter. The river froze overnight. We thought it some trick of weather the gods playing. Then the dead came. The hush that fell around them tasted of Iar. You're sure?" Brandon's voice was very calm. Jared's eyes rolled white. "I saw them. My own uncle, cold as stone, walking with his guts hanging like sausages. My lord, we ran. We ran south as fast as we could, but they never slowed. Only the sun held them back, and even then you could feel it like teeth at your heels. They were whispering. In my dreams. He broke off, shuddering. Tears froze at the corners of his eyes. "I left my son. Gods forgive me, I left him, I ran. Brandon swung down from his horse. He stood a moment, looking at the man, and then he put his gloved hand on Jared's shoulder. "You did what you had to do to live," he said. "You ran and you lived. Now you tell us, and maybe others will live too. You did well, Jared Tanner." Jared's sob turned into a hiccuping laugh. He clung to Brandon's hand for a heartbeat, then dropped to his knees again as if in prayer. "See that he's fed," Brandon told the nearest guard, "and put somewhere warm, if there is such a place left in these lands." That night, Alanna dreamed of a river gone silent all at once. No, not silent. The sound was still there, but changed. The rush and gurgle of water had turned to a slow grinding, like millstones on bone. Bodies floated just under the surface, eyes open, hair trailing like weeds. The water did not carry them away. It only turned and turned, a black will under a gray sky. She woke with frost on her lashes and the taste of river mud in her mouth. When at last they reached the trident, King Christopher's banners were already visible from miles away. The crowned black and white checkered shield of House Mud, snapping atop a forest of pikes. He had not come alone. His manner of answering Brandon's summons was to ring the crossing with his own strength and meet the North's host at the river's edge, where both could feel the pull of home at their backs. Brandon rode forward with only a handful of men, gone among them. Alanna, unable to hold herself back, slipped through the press of men until she was as close as she dared. She clutched the reins of her pony so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Stay here," a steward hissed at her. "You've no business." He broke off as someone touched his arm. Alanna glanced up, startled, into Gone Mud's eyes. They were pale hazel in the winter light, flecks of green around the pupils. He looked older up close than he had from a distance, lines carved already at the corners of his mouth. "She's one of ours," Gone lied smoothly. "Part of my retinue. Let her be." The steward blinked, nodded, and turned away. Alanna stared at Gone. He winked again, just as he had at the complaining Northman days before. "You listen very hard for a serving girl," he said under his breath. "Careful. In some lands they cut out tongues for less." Heat shot to her cheeks despite the cold. Some lords could stand to listen more. Gone's mouth twitched. True enough. On the far side of the river, King Christopher sat on a black courser, his crown a jagged circlet on his wind-raw head. His cloak was thick fur, his armor well-made but scarred from other wars. He was not a man of silk and suet. His hands were calloused on the reins. "Well met, Lord Stark," he called across the rushing water. His breath steamed. "You bring winter with you." "I bring warning," Brandon replied. "The dead have crossed the wall. They've taken the castles of the Watch and are marching south. We must stand together, or we will die apart." "You ask much," Christopher said. His gaze flicked past Brandon, taking in the host at his back. "You march your men into my lands with steel bared and tell me I must stand with you. If I say no, do you mean to force me?" Brandon did not flinch. "If you say no, you mean to force me to watch your people die when the dead come. I would call that the greater violence." Laughter rustled among Christopher's knights. The king's jaw tightened. "How many dead have you seen with your own eyes, Stark?" "None," Brandon said. "Yet." Christopher's mouth curled. "So you come to me with tales and ravens. You drag stories out of the snow and expect me to bleed for them." Brandon's patience snapped like a frozen branch. He signaled, and Maester Herod rode forward with a small iron-bound chest slung from his saddle. Gone glanced at Alanna, then nudged his horse closer to the chest. There was something wary and hopeful in his eyes both. "Open it," Brandon said. "My lord," Herod began, faintly aghast, but Brandon's gaze cut him off. "Open it," he repeated. The maester swallowed and dismounted. His fingers fumbled on the latches. As he knelt, the men on both banks of the river leaned forward, as if drawn on strings. The lid creaked open. At first Alanna saw nothing but a tangle of rags and straw. Then the rags shifted. What rose from the chest had once been a man. His skin was the color of old cheese, stretched tight over yellowing bone. His eyes were twin blue coals, unnatural and cold, burning without light. Frost rimed his hair, his fingers clenched and unclenched, nails black. His lips peeled back from broken teeth, and a sound came out, not quite a word, not quite a groan. Time seemed to slow. The river's rush went muffled in Alanna's ears. Every breath in her chest turned to ice. The dead thing moved. It lunged at Herod, faster than seemed possible, chains clanking. Herod shouted, stumbled back, slipped on the frosty bank. The corpse fell atop him, hands like iron on his throat. Alanna did not remember drawing her knife. One moment she was frozen, heart a drumbeat in her ears. The next she was moving. Someone else moved more quickly. Gawain's sword flashed, steel bright against the corpse's gray flannel. He hacked at its arm. The blade bit and stuck, half-severing dead flesh that did not bleed. Hold high. M. Brandon's roar cracked the air. Men surged. Chains rattled. The corpse snarled, teeth snapping shut inches from Herod's face. Its breath smoked blue, cold enough to burn. It grabbed the edge of the chest and flung it aside as if it weighed nothing. The iron-bound box smashed into the river, splashing. For a heartbeat, Alanna met its eyes. There was no hatred there, no anger, only an utter, implacable stillness, like the heart of a frozen lake. Her hand shook. The knife slipped. Brandon seized a spear from the nearest guard and drove it down, pinning the corpse to the half-frozen earth. It writhed, back-arching, blue fire whirling in its sockets. Frost crept up the spear's shaft toward Brandon's hands. Fire! Gawain bellowed. Someone get fire! Took longer than it should have. Men stared, transfixed, as if frozen. At last a torch came, snatched from the nearest brazier. Brandon dropped the spear, seized the torch and thrust it down. The corpse went up like tinder. Flame-licked, hungry. The dead thing writhed and screamed soundlessly, its jaw gaping, fingers clawing at the air. The smell hit them. Burning hair, rancid fat, and several men gagged. Alanna clamped her teeth together so hard her jaw hurt. Christopher's horse danced on the far bank, nostrils flaring. The king's crown sat crooked on his head now, forgotten. His face was pale as milk. You see, Brandon said hoarsely, holding the torch steady until the corpse collapsed into charred bone and ash. This is no story to frighten children. This is what walks in my lands now. This is what will be at your gates before spring unless we stop it. Silence, save for the crackle of burning and the rush of the river. At last, very softly, Christopher said, "What do you ask of me?" And that was how the first Southern king joined the war. News spread down the river faster than men could ride. The tales changed as they moved, as tales always did, but the core remained. The North had brought a dead man to life before the king of rivers and hills, and the thing's cold claws had nearly wrapped around the maester's throat before it burned. Children whispered of it in the shadows of village inns. Men cursed as they tightened their belts against hunger and prepared to march. From the Trident, the host rolled south and west, gathering more men, more fear, like a snowball gathering ice. The winter pressed on them, another enemy. They heard rumors as they went, of towns swallowed by mist, where the sun had not been seen in a month. Of fishermen whose nets brought up fingers instead of fish. Of flocks left in their pens overnight, frozen solid on their feet, eyes glassy and blue. Some rumors were only feverish tales. Some were not. The Storm King waited for them in his hall high above the restless sea, all gold and storm clouds. "I should have stayed in my castle," Gawain muttered as they climbed the last hill. "Let my brothers deal with this." "You're here," Brandon said. "That is what matters." Gawain snorted, then sobered. If he refuses, Brandon said, "then we will remember Jared's river and Christopher's face and the sound that thing made when it burned. And we will decide how much we are willing to do to keep that sound from echoing in the Stormlands." Alanna's dreams the night before had been strange. She had seen the Storm King's hall empty and echoing, its banners torn, water pouring down the steps as if the sea itself had risen to claim it. She had seen a woman with hair like copper shouting as the waves took her ankles. She did not know what it meant. She only knew that when Brandon and his retinue went in to speak with the Storm King, something in her bones went tense as a drawn bow. The Storm King, as Gon had predicted, liked the sound of his own name. Durin of the Storm, he proclaimed it, pacing before his throne as Brandon laid the Raven's scrolls at his feet. He was taller than Christopher, broader, his beard thick as a lion's mane. His hall was full of polished wood and carvings of ships and storm clouds. Durin God's grief, my forebears were called. The storm does not frighten us. We are the storm. You come into my hall with northern tales and expect me to cower like a child under his bed. I expect you to listen, Brandon said, voice even. I have listened, Durin said. I have heard you say that the cold is worse and the sky darker in your bleak northern wastes than usual. This is your winter, wolf. Do not drag it to my door and call it a gift. Gon shifted, as if to speak, but Brandon stayed him with the smallest flicker of his fingers. The dead have crossed the wall, Brandon said. You saw what was left of one at the Trident. We did not take it from a bard's song. My men captured it at the Shadow Tower. When it was burned, it screamed. Does winter scream in your tales? Storm King? Durin's jaw clenched. You could have drugged a man and painted his eyes. You could have. Enough, Brandon said. The word hung in the air like a blade. Durin's hand clenched on his crown. You forget whose hall you stand in, Northerner. No, Brandon stepped forward, ignoring the hiss of indrawn breath from the Stormland Knights. No, I remember too well. I remember that when the Undulls came, they brought their 7 gods and their 7 swords, and they broke the backs of the first men from here to the neck. I remember that in all that chaos, only the North stood whole, because we held the neck and would not let them cross. He moved closer. He was a good half-foot shorter than Durin, but somehow he did not seem smaller. Now something worse than Undulls comes. It will not stop at your borders. When your people scream, it will not be in a tongue you understand. I have no time for your pride. So here is what I offer you, Durin of the Storm. March with me. Bring your men and your ship. North. Stand at my side when we meet the dead, and I will count you my ally. I will not ask you to kneel. You may keep your crown and your storms, or refuse me, and stay here in this hall with your ears stopped. And when the cold comes and the dead batter down your gates, remember that you had the chance to stand and chose instead to cower. The hall held its breath. Slowly, Durin's face darkened. You dare. I dare, Brandon said. Because I have seen too many broken walls in my dreams to stand on courtesy. Answer me. Pride warred in the Storm King's eyes with something more primal. Fear, yes, but also a harsh, reluctant admiration. This was no courtier simpering for favor. This was a man who had walked miles through snow to stand and be told no, and would do it again and again until he heard yes. You would not ask me to kneel, Durin said at last, but you would make me dance to your tune. I would have us march to the same drum, Brandon said. The tune belongs to the dead. We have only how we step to it. Durin stared at him another long, almost painful moment, then threw back his head and laughed. Gods damn you, wolf, he said. If these tales of yours are true, then I will not be the one remembered as the king who sat and sulked while snow swallowed the world. Very well. I will march. I will bring men and ships. I will send ravens to the other kings and speak your case. But I tell you this, Stark. If you lie, if this is some northern ploy, I will be the storm that tears your walls down to their roots. If I lie, Brandon said quietly, I will deserve it. And so another king joined the cause. In Highgarden, the Garden King agreed before Brandon had finished his plea, his mind too occupied with the fate of his orchards to risk a frost that never ended. In the Westerlands, the King of the Rock demanded gold in exchange for his swords and received instead a string of hard truths about the worth of treasure in a world buried in ice. Some bent quickly, some slowly, but in the end all did bend, save Dorn, who replied with a curt message that if the North needed help, it should have thought twice before calling itself a kingdom at all. "Let them bake in their sun," Gon said wryly, when he read the Dornish prince's reply over Brandon's shoulder. "If the cold truly is as bad as you say, they'll have their share of it in time." "Perhaps," Brandon said, "or perhaps the dead prefer darker lands. In any case, we do not have time to argue with deserts." They turned north. The host that moved back across the Trident was not the same as the smallish northern army that had first crossed it. It was vaster, louder, more fractious. Banners flapped. The crowned stag of the Stormlands, the trident of House Mud, the rose of the Reach, the lion of the Rock. And there, still and stubborn amid the riot of color, the gray direwolf of Stark. Men muttered and snapped at each other in camp. Fights broke out, quickly quelled. The food was never enough. The cold grew sharper as they moved north again, as if resenting their return. Alanna watched it all from the shadows, eyes hollowed by sleepless dreams. In those dreams, she saw the north burning blue. They rode harder. Ravens met them on the road, feathers bedraggled, wings tired. The news they brought was never good. The dead had taken Deep Lake, a small garrison holed between Eastwatch and Castle Black, and turned its men. They had swept through the haunted forest, making its name new and horrible. They had reached the lakes north of Last Hearth, and the great pines there cracked and fell under the weight of their frost. Cregan's ravens told them the north still held. Barely. The Umbers and Karstarks had pulled back to more defensible positions, burning villages and fields as they went, leaving nothing for the dead to use. Refugees packed Winterfell's yards and cellars, shivering and weeping, clutching bundles of rags that had been their lives. "Every day we march," Brandon said, hands clenched on his reins. "The line moves south, then we march faster," Durin said grimly at his side. Stormland and northern horses snorted and tossed their heads together, breath smoking in twin streams. Alanna rode with the baggage, but sometimes, when her dreams woke her too violently to sit still, she would press forward until she could see the leading banners. Brandon looked different now from the man who had left Winterfell weeks ago. There were new lines at the corners of his mouth, new gray strands in his hair. He spoke less, listened more. When he did speak, men listened. "Look at him," Gon said one night, as they watched Brandon stand over a map by torchlight, jaw clenched. "He's not thinking like a lord anymore. He's thinking like something bigger." "Bigger," Alanna repeated, startled he was speaking to her at all. Gon scratched at his stubble, eyes narrowed. "You can feel it, the way men listen, the way the other kings have started to shape their plans around his without even noticing. He's not just a Stark anymore. He's, what would you call it? When one tree's roots wrap around all the others and drink from them all. A heart tree," she said without thinking. Gon's eyes flicked to her, then to the weirwood that loomed over the camp, its red leaves fluttering slowly in a wind none of them could feel. "Yes," he said softly, "perhaps." Moat Cailin loomed out of the marshes again, its towers black against the paling sky. Beyond it lay the north, vast and white and wounded. They found Last Hearth burning, not with natural flame. Not at first. From miles away, they saw the smoke, a strange, pale column, tinged faintly blue. The air grew colder as they approached, the breath of their horses turning from mist to rime on their muzzles. Men's beards froze to their cloaks. "It's too late," Gon murmured, squinting toward the smudge on the horizon. "Perhaps," Brandon said, "or perhaps not." He kicked his horse into a canter, then a gallop. The leading banners streamed behind him. Alanna's pony stumbled, exhausted, but she urged the poor beast on, teeth gritted. Around her, the host's vanguard surged, an arrow of men splitting the white. Last Hearth's walls glittered. Frost had grown on stone, slick and blue. The great gate, usually iron-bound oak, was a shard of ice, its hinges encased in a shining sheath. Men lay scattered in the yard beyond, visible through gaps in the wall. Some black, charred shapes, some white and still. The cold coming off the place bit through mail and leather. Men shivered and cursed, breath laboring in their chests. Torches, Brandon snapped. Oil. Now, they had learned. They came with fire. Stormland men, used to dealing with driving rain, were quickest. They had braziers lit and oil-soaked rags ready in moments, their movements jerky at the edges from fear but sure. Northern men brought out stores of pitch. Arrows were dipped and drawn. On the walls of Last Hearth, figures stirred. At first Alanna thought they were survivors, men who had held out against the storm of dead, waiting for aid. She lifted herself in the stirrups, heart leaping. Then one turned, and she saw the blue glass of his eyes. Her dream of Winterfell's yard rushed back. Cregan rising, snow trickling from his mouth. Her stomach turned. Loose, Brandon said, voice flat. Fire arced. Flaming arrows streaked through the cold air, hissing as the unnatural chill tried to smother their heat. Some snuffed out halfway, some hit and held, clinging like angry tongues to the frost. The figures on the walls shrieked without sound and flailed as the fire took them. They toppled, falling stiffly, limbs jerking. When they hit the ground, some broke like brittle statues. Others staggered back to their feet, still burning, still moving. For the love of the gods, Gon breathed. What kind of war is this? The only one we've got, Durin said. He raised his sword, flame reflected in its blade. Forward, Stormland men were used to charging against high walls in driving rain. Today was little different, save that the rain bit instead of soaking. They slammed torches into cracks in the ice, shoved battering rams, hacked with axes. The gate groaned, cracked, shattered. The wave of cold that rolled out was like being plunged into a frozen river. Tried to choke them, to halt hearts and stiffen limbs. Men staggered. Some fell and did not rise. But behind and above them, the torches burned, fierce gold against the dull blue, and in that light they moved. The yard of Last Hearth was a charnel ground. Dead men lay everywhere, their bodies rimed with frost. Some wore the Umber Giant on their breasts. Some wore black, the badge of the Watch. Some wore nothing at all but tattered rags, their feet bare and blue. As the living poured through the gate, some of those bodies stirred. Brandon had ordered the vanguard to carry torches and dragonglass-dipped spears, iron wrapped around stone older than kingdoms. Those who had doubted the tales had had their doubts burned out of them at the trident. Now they moved with desperate precision. When the bodies jerked upright, they were met with fire. Alanna did not know when she had dismounted. One moment she was clutching her pony's reins. The next she was on foot, knife in hand, the yard a chaos of flame and frost around her. A dead man lurched toward her, his hair a stiff halo of ice, his jaw unhinged. She ducked under his grasping hands and drove her blade up into his chin. Steel alone did not stop him. He snarled, breath freezing on her face. She screamed and hacked, slashing at his neck. The knife skittered off frozen flesh. Panic clawed at her throat. Then a spearhead of black stone punched through the dead man's eye. He jerked, stiffened, and collapsed like a cut string. Alanna stared. The spear's shaft led to a small, wiry man in patched leather armor. His hair like wet moss, eyes startlingly green. Cranigman? She gasped. He grinned, fierce and quick. You Northerners are slow to learn, he said, yanking the spear free. Fire and stone. The children taught us that long ago. Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, moving like smoke through the chaos. By nightfall, Last Hearth burned in truth. They had held it, barely. Hundreds of men lay dead again, this time for good, their bodies ash and bone. The cold receded a little, enough that men's fingers could feel again, their breath fogging instead of freezing. Brandon stood on the wall with Gon, Durin, and the other kings and lords, looking north. The sky above the trees was a shifting curtain of eerie lights, green and blue and violet, rippling like silk in some giant's hand, painted the snow in strange colors. Alanna watched from the yard, head tipped back. They're closer, she heard Brandon say. Every day closer. Then we must meet them, Durin said. What use is it to sit behind walls while the world dies to the north? Gon's breath smoked beside him. Where? Brandon's hand rested on the frost-rimed stone. We draw them to us, he said. We pick where we stand. We cannot chase them through the woods. They do not tire, but they are drawn to warmth, to life. To us, we'll use that. We'll make our stand where the land narrows, where we can put fire on 3 sides and stone on the 4th. Moat Cailin, Gon said. Brandon shook his head. Too far south. If we wait for them there, Winterfell will fall. No, there is another place. His finger traced north on the map. The others leaned in. The Long Lake, he said, and the barrows west of it. We'll make our line there. We'll dig trenches, lay sharpened stakes, build towers wide, take braziers. We'll have the crannogmen under the water, the archers on the hills, the dragons in the sky, if they come. He looked up at the lights. We bring everything we have. If we fail there, there'll be no more lines to draw. The word dragons hung in the air like smoke. Alanna looked north, toward a wall she had never seen and a breach she had only ever known in dreams. Her skin prickled, gooseflesh rising along her arms. Will it be enough? She whispered, to no one in particular. A voice she recognized from the gods would rose in her bones. Not as you are. She started. The yard around her was suddenly impossibly still. The sound of men, of horses, of crackling fires faded to a dull murmur. The snowflakes hung motionless in the air. You, she breathed. The word wasn't spoken in one voice, but many. Leaves whispering, branches creaking, roots groaning deep in the earth. In the stillness, shapes resolved around her. Small, slight figures with bark for skin and eyes glowing green. Children of the forest, old Nan would have called them, but there was nothing childish about this gaze. You're real, Alanna said. It felt foolish even as she said it. But what else was there? We are as real as you, less and more. We are what is left. Her knees wanted to buckle. What do you want with me? You chose to follow. The first of their voices, the woman from the Godswood, stepped closer, her bare feet leaving no prints in the snow. Her hair was a tangle of leaves and thorns. You dream. You see, that is more than any king. I see nightmares, Alanna snapped, fear sharp on her tongue. Dead men and broken stone. What good does that do? I can't stop any of it. Cannot? The woman tilted her head. Or will not. The snow shifted under Alanna's boots, reminding her that gravity still existed. What are they? She whispered. Truly? The ones beyond the wall. The white ones. The ones who drive the dead. The children fell very still. The lights in their eyes made her think of the corpse's blue glare and shiver. Not yours, the woman said. Not ours. They were made once, like swords are made, to cut an enemy we feared. But swords do not ask what flesh they cut. They only cut. The earth groaned faintly under Alanna's feet, as if it remembered. We saw men, another voice said. A smaller figure, his voice high and bright, like water over stones. We saw your axes, your fires. We saw our woods fall, so we poured winter into flesh. We wrapped ice around anger. We made them to stand where we could not, against you. And now they come for us all, Alanna said, her throat tight. Yes, the first woman's eyes were very old. They are what happens when we try to answer fire with cold, hate with hate. Now there is only one way to stop them. How? Blood, the earth whispered. Bound, a thread through stone and tree and man, a knot drawn tight. It hurt to listen. Her skull felt too small for the sound. Whose blood? She asked, though she was afraid she knew. Stark blood, the woman said gently. The blood that holds the north. The blood that sat in front of the heart trees when we spoke. It was you who swore to hold the wall long ago. It was you who broke that pact when you let more men through than the land could bear. The wall cracked because its oath had cracked. Alanna's heart thudded. I didn't swear anything. No, the woman said, but he did. The image of Brandon standing in the Godswood rose, unbidden in Alana's memory. Younger then, but hard-eyed, hand on Ice's hilt, promising to his gods and his children that the North would never let the South steal its voice. Promising to hold the wall, to guard the realms of men. Promising, always promising. The Starks were good at that. "What do you ask of him?" she whispered. "That he bind himself to the land," the woman said simply. "That he lay his blood on the stone at the heart of the long lake and swear not only for himself, but for every child of his blood to come. To stand, to guard, to never again use the wall as a knife instead of a shield. We will pour our power into it, what we have left. The line will hold." "That doesn't sound so terrible," Alana said slowly. "A vow is just words. Words are never just words," the woman said, "and there is a price." "What price?" "His life, his freedom, some of his line's lives too, in years to come. The wall will not stand on words alone. It must stand on bone, on blood, on the heart of a king." The snow began to fall again in earnest, the flakes catching the green light and twisting, turning. "If he binds," the woman said, "the white ones will be pushed back. They will sleep. The dead will lie still. Men will live. Not easily, not forever, but long enough to forget. If he does not bind, the wall will break further, and there will be no stopping what comes." Cold crawled up from the ground into Alana's bones. "Why tell me?" she whispered. "Tell him. He's the one with a sword. He hears us only in dreams, and even there only faintly. Winter blurs the world. You..." Her leaf hair swayed as she stepped closer, reaching out a slender hand. "You are open. You walk between. Tell him." "I'm no one," Alana said again, weakly. The woman's fingers brushed her cheek. They were neither warm nor cold. They felt like the touch of leaves in a high wind. "No one has ever saved the world," she said. "Only someone. Go." The world snapped back. Sound crashed around her. Men shouting, fires crackling, horses snorting. The distant thud of axes biting into wood as they tore down the last of Last Hearth's outbuildings for fuel. Alana staggered, almost falling, heart hammering. No one around her seemed to have noticed anything strange. She looked up at the wall. Brandon Stark stood there, silhouetted against the weird lights, his cloak whipping in the icy wind, gone and dew. Ran flanking him. He looked like the trunk of some immense dark tree, rooted in stone. Alana's feet moved before her mind had caught up. She climbed. Men stepped aside for her without quite knowing why. Some scowled. Some barely registered her at all. She moved as in a dream, her breath sharp in her chest, fingers numb on the stone ladder's rungs. By the time she reached the top, words had tumbled into some kind of order in her head. "My lord," she gasped, bursting onto the wall walk. Brandon turned. Surprise flickered across his face, then recognition. "Alana? What in the seven hells are you doing up here?" Gon's eyes widened. "I told you she listens too hard," he murmured. "I need to speak with you," she said. Her teeth chattered, whether from cold or fear she could not say. "Now, please." Brandon frowned. His hand brushed Ice's hilt, almost unconsciously. "This is hardly the time for..." "It is," she said, and her voice did not tremble. Durin snorted. "You let your kitchen wenches order you about now, Stark? Truly the North is changing." Brandon shot him a look that shut him up. He studied Alana for a long, weighing moment, eyes narrowed. She held his gaze. Behind him, the sky writhed with ghostly color. "Very well," he said at last. "Gone, Durin. See that the men do not set themselves on fire with their own torches. I will be back shortly." Without waiting for their protest, he took Alana's arm and steered her away, down into the shadow of a half-collapsed tower. "Well?" he said when they were alone. "Speak." Her mouth had gone dry. The words she had rehearsed on the ladder tangled. She took a breath, then another. "I've been dreaming," she blurted, "since before the ravens came. Of the wall, of the dead, of you." His brow creased. "Alana, everyone in the North has nightmares now. We've earned them. This is hardly. Not like that, she said fiercely. They're not dreams, they're like when old Nan tells a tale and you can see it in front of you, only worse. I dreamed the wall broke before the raven came. I dreamed of a man with blue eyes before we caught that corpse. I dreamed of Jared's river the night before he fell in the road. And just now, when you were talking about the long lake, they came. They? His voice had gone very quiet. The children, she whispered. He stared. She plunged on, terrified that if she stopped, she would never find the courage again. The ones from the old tales, the ones who lived in the woods before us. They are real, my lord, and they are angry, or ashamed, or both. They say the White Walkers, the white ones beyond the wall, were made by them. Long ago, to fight us, men. And now they want us all dead. He said nothing. His jaw tightened. His eyes went flinty. They say the wall stands on oaths, Alanna said. Not just stone and spells. On promises, on your blood, on every Stark who ever sat before a heart tree and said they would guard the north. You swore once to hold the wall, to keep the dead out and the living safe. But we broke that somewhere in little ways and big. We let too many men through. We used the watch as a broom, sweeping our bastards and unwanted north. We stopped sending food, stopped caring. The wall knows, the magic in it knows. Cracked for that. And what, the trees told you this? Brandon's voice was harsh, but beneath it there was something else. Not quite belief, not quite disbelief. Yes, she said simply. They say there is only one way now. You must bind yourself. At the long lake, on the stone at its heart. You must swear and pay the price. Then they will pour their power into it. The wall will be reborn, stronger. The dead will be pushed back. He laughed once, short and bitter. And what is this price, according to your trees? She swallowed. Your life. Silence fell between them, dense as snowfall. She realized, distantly, that she was shaking. Anything else? Brandon asked after a moment, as if they were talking of the day's rations. The lives of some of your line, she whispered. Someday, not now, but the magic will demand blood. Every few generations. Probably a king. Maybe more. They didn't say clearly, but it will keep the wall strong. It will keep the dead behind it. It will. She broke off, the words tangling in her throat. It will save us, she finished very softly. For a long moment, Brandon said nothing. The lights in the sky rippled. Men shouted somewhere below, laughter too loud and brittle. Snow creaked on stone. What if they lie? He said at last. I don't think they can, she said. They don't speak like we do. They hardly understand lying. They just are, like trees, or wolves, or winter. And if they are wrong? His gaze flicked north, toward the dark line of the forest. If I throw myself into some lake and spill my blood on a rock, and no wall rises, and my son stands here fatherless with the dead still coming? I don't know, she said. Her eyes burned. I want to tell you I'm sure that this is the only way. That's what they say. But I'm not a maester. I can't promise you anything. I only know that they came to me, not you. That they chose someone who is no one. That has to mean something. His mouth twisted. Where is this stone? He asked. She blinked. You believe me? I believe, he said slowly, that in a world where we drag corpses around to burn before kings and the sky dances like a torch, it would be foolish to ignore the girl who dreams true. Where is the stone? She closed her eyes, reaching back to the image the children had pushed into her mind. A rock, she said, black, smooth, in the center of the lake. The water around it is shallow, just knee-deep, but it drops away suddenly after. There are trees on the shore. Old ones, a weirwood but smaller than our. Yes. The shore is narrow, hemmed in by hills. If you stand on the rock, you can see everything. And they can see you. She shivered. Convenient, he said, that it's also a good place for a battle. He stared at the snow for a long moment, then lifted his gaze. You will take me there, he said. She gaped. Me? You saw it, he snapped. You spoke with them. I have no map that marks some magical bloody stone. You will take me there. And if this is some fever dream, if you lead me astray, then we will know you were wrong, and I will be dead anyway, and the world will end, and it will hardly matter. Yes. Her laugh came out half-choked. You have a terrible way of making a girl feel important, my lord. He almost smiled. I've no time for gentler ways. He laid a hand on her shoulder. It was heavy, but not unkind. Tell no one else of this, he said. Not yet. Not my sons, not the other kings. They have enough fear. I will tell them what they need to hear when they need to hear it. She nodded, throat too tight to speak. Go, he said. Sleep, if you can. Tomorrow we march for the long lake. She went. She did not sleep. When she closed her eyes, she saw the black stone rising from the water, its surface slick with blood. The march to the long lake was shorter in miles than the one from Winterfell to the Trident had been, but it felt infinitely longer. Every step led deeper into a thinning world. The air grew brittle. The sun, when it appeared, was a pale smudge behind veils of cloud. They passed villages that had been emptied, their doors swinging, their wells frozen solid. Once, in a small clearing, they found a circle of men and women kneeling around a fire pit, their hands clasped, heads bowed. Frost had grown over their faces like masks. They had frozen in the act of prayer. Durin crossed himself in 3 different southern ways and muttered, "Where were your gods that day?" "Where they always are," Brandon said, "watching and not lifting a finger, comforting." Scouts went ahead. Crannogmen ghosted through the reeds and snow, returning with word of movements in the northern woods. Shapes glimpsed between trees, a sense of being watched. No more than that yet. The dead were near, but not here. "We're running out of time," Gawain said as they topped a rise and saw, at last, the glimmer of the long lake spread before them like a slab of dull silver. "No," Brandon said. "We have just enough." The lake matched Alana's dream. Long and narrow, it stretched east to west, its far shore blurred by blowing snow. Hills rose on the northern bank, dotted with ancient mounds. Barrows, their stones softened by moss and time. On the southern side, the land sloped gently down from the rise where they stood, providing a clear field for archers. In the lake's center, a black stone thrust up, wet and slick, its shoulders hunched against the wind. A small weirwood grew on the near shore, its red leaves clinging stubbornly to bare white branches. Its carved face watched the water with empty solemnity. "It will do," Brandon said quietly. "We make our stand here." He turned to his gathered captains and kings. "We have fire," he said. "We have spears of dragonglass. We have men enough to pull the world itself down if we stack them high. We do not have fear to spare. We will drive stakes into the ground along this shore, 3 lines deep. We will dig trenches and fill them with oil. We will build towers along the barrows and put archers there. We will line the lake with braziers. We will set the Crannogmen in the shallows. When the dead come, we will burn them. When the white ones come, we will cut them down with stone and steel. We will hold." "And the wall?" Gawain asked softly, eyes flicking to the stone. Brandon's jaw clenched. "Leave that to me." Men moved. They dug and hammered and cursed, breath steaming, hands numb. The trenches went in, dark gouges in the pale earth. Stakes sharpened by calloused hands stabbed up like the teeth from Alana's first dream. Oil sloshed into pits. The towers were rough things, logs lashed together, platforms hoisted. Under the cover of this furious activity, Brandon and Alana slipped away. They walked together down to the shore, their cloaks whipping. The thin ice at the lake's edge cracked under their boots. The water beyond looked black and bottomless. "How many times do you think we've done this?" Brandon murmured unexpectedly. She glanced at him, baffled. "Men," he said, "drawing lines, putting our backs to something and saying, 'Here, here we stand, here and no further.' Every time we think this is the last, that this battle will decide everything, that our children will not have to do the same. His mouth twisted. We are wrong, every time, and yet here we are again. She thought of the children of the forest, of winter poured into flesh, of bones under the snow. Maybe this time it will be different, she said. He laughed softly. You're young. You're allowed to think that. He stepped into the water. It barely rippled around his boots. For a moment, nothing happened. Then thin, pale fingers of ice curled out from his ankles, spearing toward the stone. The water between them clouded. Alana's breath caught. Brandon walked on. The ice formed under his feet as he went, a narrow path from shore to stone. The water on either side roiled faintly, as if resentful. The wind dropped. On the shore, men shouted. Durin's voice rose, sharp and angry. Gon called Brandon's name. The weirwood's leaves rustled without wind. Alana followed. She did not think. She simply moved. The ice bit through the soles of her boots like teeth. Her legs shook. Once she almost slipped. Brandon's hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. You don't have to come, he said quietly. Yes, I do, she said. He smiled, a little despite everything. They reached the stone. Up close, it was larger than it had looked from shore. Its flanks slick, its top broad enough for 3 men to stand side by side. The ice path led right up to it, then vanished, leaving a thin skin on the rock. Brandon climbed. Alana clung to the side, fingers numb, and watched. The world held its breath. On the shore, the host had paused in their frantic preparations. Men stood like toy figures in the distance, banners snapping idly, fires smoking. The weirwood watched. Brandon drew ice. The sound of steel leaving leather seemed to echo over the lake. He took off his glove. His hand was scarred, the knuckles rough, the fingers nicked and healed pale. He laid ice's edge in the center of his palm. You don't have to, Alana began. Shut up, he said without heat. He took a breath. I am Brandon Stark of Winterfell, he said, voice ringing over the water. Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, King of Winter, some would name me now, though the crown is not yet set on my head. I stand here in the sight of men, in the sight of gods, in the sight of every tree that ever drank the snowmelt of the north, and I swear that my blood will stand as the wall has stood, that my house will bind its life to the line that guards the realms of men, that never again will we use that wall as sword more than shield, that so long as a Stark bloodline runs in veins, we will hold the north against what comes from beyond it. This I swear on my name, on my life, on my children's lives, on their children's, and theirs until no more are born. And if I break this oath, he said very softly, may the wall fall and the world with it. He closed his fist. I spit. Blood welled, bright and startling against the gray steel. It spilled over his palm, ran down the greatsword's fuller, dripped onto the stone. The rock drank it. The air went out of the world. Alana gasped. She felt something reach up from the depths of the lake. It was not a physical hand, but it wrapped around her ankles all the same, cold and vast and ancient. It flowed up her legs, into her spine, her ribs, her skull. It flowed into Brandon. He jerked as if struck. His back arched. His eyes flew wide. For a heartbeat, they were not gray at all, but milky and white, as if winter itself had flooded them. The weirwood's leaves thrashed, though there was no wind. The hills shuddered. Somewhere deep underground, something cracked and realigned. The wall, miles to the north, groaned. Men along its length cried out and grabbed at stone that suddenly pulsed under their hands like a living thing. In the gap torn at Eastwatch, ice shivered and flowed, the edges knitting like flesh. Blue light flared. The storm that had clung to the broken section wailed. A high, thin sound like a blade scraping glass. On the lake, the ice at Brandon's feet reddened, the blood swirling out in veins, patterns that echoed tree roots, river branches, lines of force. Alana's mind filled with images. The wall rising, higher than mountains. Its face no longer smooth but ridged, like the bark of a huge, pale tree. its foundations driving deeper, roots pushing through soil and stone, anchoring in something that glowed green and blue at once. Faces in the ice. Some were children of the forest, their eyes mourning. Some were men, their mouths set in grim lines of determination. She recognized none of them and all of them, the White Walkers reaching for the breach and finding it gone. Their weapons struck the new ice and skittered. Their blue eyes narrowed. For the first time in their existence, perhaps, something like frustration flickered across their faces. Back! A voice whispered in a tongue older than snow. The cold recoiled. On the lake, Brandon Stark screamed. Alanna lunged, catching his arm as he staggered. Energy poured off him in waves, hot and cold at once, leaving the air tasting of metal. His skin under her hands burned. His blood sizzled on the stone. His breath came in harsh, ragged pulls. "It's too much," she gasped. "Yule, hold," a chorus whispered in her bones. "Bind." She dug her fingers in, anchoring him as best she could, as if he were a rope and she the boulder it had been tied around. Blood soaked her sleeves. Tears froze on her cheeks. "Brandon," she said, or thought she did. Her voice sounded far away. "My lord, stay, please." He swayed. Images flashed again. Cregan, kneeling in Winterfell's godswood, blood on his own hands, older, his jaw set as Brandon's now. Torrin, white-faced, eyes hollow, watching a son of his walk north with silent resolve. Children yet unborn standing before heart trees, knives in their palms, repeating words older than their tongues. Each time, the line shivered and held. Each time, the wall glowed. The price, she thought, dazed. This is the price. She caught a glimpse of something further. A girl with hair like Brandon's and gray eyes like his, centuries from now, standing before a heart tree with something like a crown on her brow, saying, "Enough, enough, no more." Then even that faded. Brandon collapsed. His weight knocked her to her knees. For a moment she thought he was dead. His skin was cold, his breath shallow. Then he opened his eyes. They were gray again, but there was something else in them now. A depth like winter sky, layers upon layers. "Alanna," he rasped. She sobbed, half laughter, half hysteria. "You stubborn, bloody northern. I thought you were about to make me a liar in front of gods." He smiled faintly. "Not yet." The ice path shivered under them. Cracks radiated from the stone, racing toward shore. "We have to go," she said. "Go," he echoed, and pushed himself to his knees, then his feet with a monumental effort. She slung his arm over her shoulders. He was heavy, but she bore it with something like gratitude. The ice boomed underfoot as they hurried back toward shore, the water rushing darkly beneath. Men were running down the bank toward them, shouting. Gaun's voice, Durin's, Cregan's, a dozen others tangled. "What did you do?" Gaun demanded as they stumbled onto earth. His eyes were huge, his face pale. "Bound the wall," Brandon panted. "Or broke it further. We'll find out soon." Cregan shoved past the others, his hair wild, his face drawn. He caught his father in a rough embrace, half hauling him the rest of the way up the slope. "You're mad," he said, voice shaking. "You're bleeding." "I know," Brandon said. "I'll bleed later. For now we have work." He pushed himself upright. Alanna watched, numb with fatigue and relief, as he went back to barking orders. His skin was pale, his lips tinged faintly blue, but there was a steadiness in him that had not been there before. When he looked north now, it was not with the gaze of a man peering over a wall, but of someone who could feel the wind blowing miles away. The wall stood. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. She felt it like a heartbeat under her feet, a slow, steady drum of power. The dead felt it too. They came that night. They came with no horns, no drums, no banners. Only the wind, rising suddenly, carrying with it a smell of old cold and new graves. The first of them appeared on the northern hills, pale shadows against the darkness, their eyes two blue stars each, Behind them came ranks and ranks of dead, an army of bone and frozen flesh, their movements jerky and unnatural. "We hold," Brandon said. "We hold here. We do not break." No one asked him how he knew. They lit the trenches as the dead began to descend. Fire roared up, a wall of orange and gold between the living and the oncoming tide. The heat blasted back in their faces. Men flinched, eyes watering. On the other side, the dead did not flinch at all. They poured into the gaps where the fire had not yet reached, spilling toward the stakes. Archers loosed. Some arrows passed clean through and did little. Others pierced eyes, mouths, joints, staggering the dead enough that the men on the line could finish them with dragonglass. The first of the White Walkers moved with eerie grace. Tall and thin, it stepped between its dead like a dancer, frost crackling under its bare feet. Its armor gleamed, pale as moonlight. It raised a blade that seemed carved from the heart of winter itself. Akrannog spear flew. The blade flicked almost lazily. The spear shattered into glittering dust. "Stone is not enough for them," Gon said through his teeth. "Fire," Durin snarled. "We need fire." As if in answer, a roar split the sky. For a heartbeat, everyone, living, dead, walker, looked up. The dragon plunged out of the clouds like a falling star. Its scales were dark as iron. Its wings spread like shadows. Fire poured from its mouth in a torrent, a ribbon of liquid gold and white. It washed over the front line of the dead, who blackened and fell like burnt grass. The White Walker turned its head, its blue eyes narrowing, frost forming on its cheekbones. Valyrian riders hooped, high and wild, as their mount banked. More shapes followed in its wake. Smaller dragons, their riders clinging to leather harnesses, their shouts torn away by the wind. "They came," Gon whispered, awed despite himself. "By all the gods, they came." "Of course they did," Brandon said somewhat grimly. "They couldn't resist." He had never quite believed they wouldn't. Men with that much pride and power would not sit out a battle like this. They too wanted tales sung of them, stories whispered in smoky halls centuries hence. The dragon's fire turned the first wave of dead into ash. The next wave stepped over it. "Keep burning," Brandon shouted. "They are many but not endless. They have to break. Burn them, break them, drown them, whatever it takes." The battle swelled around the long lake like a storm. Stormland men held the left, their shields locked, their spears stabbing with practiced rhythm. Northmen anchored the center, fighting with a ferocity born of knowing their homes directly behind them. River lords and Westermen took the right, their arrows darkening the sky, their curses colored with old grudges and new terror. Crannogmen slipped in and out of the shallows, spears flickering, dragging down dead who ventured too close to the water. In the barrows, archers loosed in high arcs, their shafts finding the blue points of eyes again and again. The White Walkers advanced, unhurried, as if strolling through a field. Fire did little to them. It licked at the frost on their armor and skittered away, hissing. They raised their blades and cut through men and horses alike, everything they touched turning brittle and white. Took dragonglass to kill them. Alanna saw the first fall. A tiny Crannogman sprang from behind a mound, dagger of black stone flashing. He drove it into the walker's throat from behind. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the walker screamed. The sound made the corpse at the trident seem like a child's whimper. It was a sound of shattering glaciers, of mountains cracking, of time itself being torn. Its blue eyes flared, then went dark, its body crumbling from the wound outward. When it hit the ground, it burst into shards that melted slowly, leaving nothing but a stain of hoarfrost and a strange, clean smell. The dead nearest it jerked. Some fell at once, strings cut, their animating force gone. Others staggered, then straightened, their movements even more disjointed. "They're bound in groups," Gon shouted over the din to the White Ones. "Kill one, you kill its share of corpses." "Then kill them," Brandon snapped. "Every last pale bastard." The dragon swooped again and again, fire raining. Men fought and fell and rose no more. The dead kept coming, but not as they had before. Something had shifted. The wall's new strength tugged at them, drawing them north, impeding their step. They could not cross the lake. Alanna saw it. A white walker, taller than the rest, its crown of ice more jagged, stepped onto the water. Where its foot fell, frost bloomed. It took another step and another, eyes fixed on Brandon. The ice held under its weight for 3 strides. Then it groaned and shattered, plunging the creature into the freezing depths up to its chest. For a moment it flailed, arms windmilling, its composure broken. Its sword hissed as it touched the water. Frost spread in frantic lines, desperate to build a platform. The wall's binding fought it. Brandon ran. He sprinted down the slope, past men locked in their own desperate duels, toward the water's edge. Alanna saw him, saw where he was heading, and felt her heart leap into her throat. "No," she whispered. "No, you've given enough." He did not hear, or he did and he ran anyway. Cregan shouted his name and followed, but he was a heartbeat too slow. Gon cursed and went after them. Durin roared and hacked down a dead man who lunged at their backs. Brandon reached the shore. He did not pause to think. He leaped. For a moment, impossibly, he was weightless. A dark shape against the lunatic sky, his cloak flaring. Then he hit the ice. It cracked, spiderwebbing outward, but held just long enough for him to land and spring again, closer to the walker that thrashed amid its own failing frost. "Stark!" the creature hissed. His voice was the shriek of nails on ice. "Little fire thing." It raised its sword.
Prendon metite.
Ice, Valyrian steel that had seen 100 lesser battles, rang against the walker's blade, a sound like 2 winters colliding. Frost raced up ice's length. Black veins crawled up the pale metal. Brandon's teeth clenched. The cold bit deep into his bones. Behind him, the wall's heartbeat pounded. He pushed. Each blow he struck landed not only on the walker's body but on something deeper. He felt dimly the wall's attention swing to this point, focusing. The Childen's whispers rose in his ears, layered over the screams of men and dragons. "Bind," they said. "Cut. End." The walker's blade nicked his shoulder. Pain flared, bright and searing, then dulled, the skin around the wound going numb. Frost crept along the fabric of his tunic, glittering. His fingers stiffened on ice's hilt. Alanna watched, helpless, from the shore. Her body would not move. Her breath burned in her lungs. Cregan reached her side, chest heaving, eyes wild. "Father!" he shouted, voice cracking. He would have rushed in if Gon had not grabbed his arm. "You'll fall through," Gon snarled. "You'll both die and leave us with nothing." "They'll kill him," Cregan spat, jerking free. "Or he'll win," Gon said. There was something like awe in his voice now. "He has to. The rest of us are just noise around whatever is happening there." On the ice, Brandon shifted his grip. He thought of Winterfell, its cracked towers and warm springs. Of the day he had taken Cregan hunting and watched his son laugh as a snowshoe hare darted from the brush. Of Torrhen's stubbornness as he insisted on learning to read battle maps upside down, so he'd never be caught by an enemy flipping his world. He thought of Alanna, a half-frozen scrap of a girl he'd found in a snowdrift 10 years ago, refusing to die. Of old Nan's tales, of his father's face the night he'd sworn to guard the wall. He thought of the Weirwood's watching eyes and the feel of his blood sinking into stone. He raised ice high. "For the living!" he roared, voice tearing from his throat. "For Winterfell!" He brought the blade down on the walker's neck. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the world shattered. The walker screamed. Its body fractured from the point of impact, lines of black racing through its ice flesh. Its crown splintered. Its blue eyes flared, then went dark, the light snapping out like torn threads. It burst. The shockwave flung Brandon backward. He hit the ice hard enough to crack it, sliding toward a widening hole where the walker had plunged through. The lake grabbed at him, cold claws digging. Hands seized him, Cregan and Gon, faces strained, muscles corded. They hauled. The ice squealed. For a terrible moment, Brandon's legs were in the water up to the knee, the cold eating through leather and flesh, teeth reaching for bone. Then he was up, onto the cracking ice, onto the path, onto the shore, collapsing in a heap of limbs and frozen cloth. The dead faltered. Across the battlefield, corpses jerked and fell. Some simply crumpled. Others shattered where they stood, pieces skittering. The remaining White Walkers, fewer now, turned as one toward the north. Retreat, Alanna realized dazedly. They're retreating. The wall's new pulse tugged at them, inescapable. Their hold on this southern incursion had been cut. The blood at the base of the binding stone had taken hold. They flowed back up the hills, the dead around them staggering and crawling, drawn as if on strings. Dragons swooped, trying to cut them down, but an invisible barrier seemed to rise, deflecting flame, turning teeth aside. "They're not gone," Gon gasped, wiping sweat and frost from his brow. "They're just contained. For now," Brandon said. He lay on the snow, staring up at the sky. His hair was rimed with frost. His lips were blue. His legs, when Alanna touched them, were numb from mid-thigh down. The flesh looked waxy. "We need a fire," she said, panicked. We need to count O." "You are living," he said. He tried to sit. His body betrayed him, tremoring. Cregan caught his shoulders, easing him up. His eyes shone with a strange mix of terror and pride. "You did it," he said, voice shaking. "You damned, stubborn old wolf. You did it." Brandon looked at the battlefield. Dead lay everywhere, burned, shattered, still. The trenches smoldered. The stakes were blackened. The towers leaned. Men stumbled amid the carnage, searching for friends, for brothers, for proof they themselves were still alive. The dragons circled, their riders reining them in with difficulty, muscles standing out in their arms. One dragon lay in a smoking heap near the lake's eastern edge, its wings torn, its neck at an unnatural angle, its rider a small, charred shape nearby. "We held," Brandon said. "For now, the wall holds. The dead are driven back." He looked at Alanna. "And we have bound ourselves to it." She nodded, tears spilling over, freezing on her cheeks. "And what now?" Gon asked softly. "What do we tell the songs? That we stood here and didn't die? That the world didn't end?" "We tell them," Brandon said slowly, "that once there was a night when the world almost died, and men stood together north and south, storm and river and rock and rose, and said no. We tell them that we bought time, that we paid in blood so children yet unborn could laugh and fight and curse and love and forget." His eyes went to the distant line of the wall, invisible from here but achingly present in his bones. "We tell them," he said very quietly, "that the Starks swore to keep watch, and that vow will end us someday, but not today." Durin limped up, blood running from a cut on his forehead, his crown askew. "You're a damned fool," he growled, "jumping on ice like that. Kings are not supposed to throw themselves at monsters. That's what the rest of us are for." "I'm not a king," Brandon said. "Aren't you?" Durin snorted. He glanced back at the host, at the men clumped around cooking fires now, at the banners dragging in the smoky air. In their faces, in the way they looked at Brandon, there was a new weight. Christopher Mudd came, his armor dented, his eyes hollow but bright. The Garden King stumbled beside him, cloak torn, roses blackened with soot. "Look at them," Gon said softly. "They're waiting." "For what?" Alanna asked, though she knew. "For what comes next," he said. "For someone to tell them what they survived for." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of burned flesh and pitch. The weird lights in the sky were fading, replaced by ordinary stars. The cold bit deeper now, no longer sharpened by unnatural malice but still unrelenting. Brandon pushed himself to his feet. His legs trembled. He planted ice like a staff and leaned on it, his breath ragged. Cregan hovered, torn between supporting him and knowing his father would hate it. Alanna stood close enough to catch him if he fell. He walked down the slope, through the wreckage of the trenches, past men who stared and straightened as he passed, past dragons curled around their own wounds, smoke drifting from their nostrils. He walked to a torn stretch of ground where the battle had churned the earth to frozen mud. There he turned. "Men of Westeros," he said. The word tasted strange on his tongue. Until this winter, it had been a scholar's name, something only maesters used. Now it felt like a promise. Men of the north, of the stormlands, of the rivers and the hills, of the reach of the westerlands, of lands beyond my knowing. We stood here tonight together. We bled together. We did not break. A low murmur answered him. Gon's breath smoked at his side. "The wall holds," Brandon said. "The dead are driven back, but they are not gone. They may sleep for 100 years, 1,000, but they will wake again if we forget. There must always be men on the wall. There must always be someone watching. There must always be someone to stand here and say no." His gaze raked them hard and proud. "I have bound myself and my house to that task. Our blood is the mortar in that wall now. It is only right that we take the weight that comes with it." He took a breath. "I am Brandon Stark of Winterfell," he said. "I am Warden of the North. I am King of Winter, some of you would call me. But that is not enough. Not anymore. The dead did not come only for the North, and the North did not stand alone. This war was all our war. These dead belong to all our dead. So I say this, from this night forward, there will be no more separate wars. No more kings who say, 'This is not my fight,' when winter comes. From this night, there will be one realm in this land. One realm, many lords, many banners, but one shield when winter falls." He lifted ice. "I will be that shield," he said. "I will be the hand that holds it. I will take your oaths, and I will answer them. I will guard the living against what comes from the dark. Not because I am better than you, because someone must, and I have already paid the price." Silence. Then Durin of the Storm moved. Slowly, stiffly, he went down on one knee, his crown slipping, his cloak pooling around him. "The storm bows to winter," he said, voice raw. "So long as winter stands at our side when the winds rise." Christopher Mudd followed. "The rivers flow north," he said, "for as long as the snowmelt feeds them." The Garden King knelt, his hands shaking. "The roses bow their heads," he said, "and rise again only when you give leave." One by one, the lords went down. Men watched, stunned. Some wept openly, from exhaustion or relief or something else. Gon looked at Alanna. There was something in his eyes she could not quite name. Ah yes, fear perhaps, and underneath it, a gleam of wry humor. "Well," he said quietly, "there's your empire." She stared. At the kneeling kings, at Brandon standing amid them with ice in his hair and blood on his hands, at the wall's unseen line thrumming through the ground beneath all their knees. "It's not his empire," she said softly. "It's Winter's. Winter wears a wolf's face now," Gon said. "History will call it what it likes." History did. They called it the Stark Empire afterward. Song and scroll told of how Brandon the Bound, first Emperor of Winter, forged a realm from shattered crowns and frozen fields. How he ruled from Winterfell, its halls expanded to house not only his own house but emissaries and hostages from every corner of Westeros. How he reformed the Night's Watch into a standing legion, half volunteer, half conscript, its numbers swelled by southern lads who had never seen snow before they donned black. They told of how he limped for the rest of his life, the cold never leaving his bones. Of how he spent long hours in the God's Wood, eyes distant, as if listening to voices only he could hear. Of how he died, 15 years after the Long Lake, with his hand pressed to the heart tree's bark, his last words a whisper of hold. They told less in those first songs of the cost. Of each time a Stark of the blood felt the wall tug on their heart and knew they would have to walk north and not return. Of how Cregan's eldest son, in his turn, bled on the binding stone when the dead stirred in their sleep a century later, and how the Empire held steady as a result. of how Alana Snow, no one and someone, refused all offers of a name, choosing instead to become the first of the Watch's dreamers, the ones who sat before the heart trees and watched the things men could not see. Gawn Mudd's name came up in footnotes rather than songs. The River Prince who became Brandon's first hand, who wrote in neat, wry script of how Winter and Storm learned to share a table without biting too much of each other's fingers. He married a northern girl, they said, and spent the rest of his days complaining about the cold and defending the new empire from within and without. Durin returned to his storms, Christopher to his rivers, the Garden King to his gardens, frost-damaged but stubborn. They ruled as kings still under their own laws, but when Winter's messengers came, they answered not as distant monarchs but as stewards of pieces of a larger whole. South of the Neck, children grew up knowing there was a man in Winterfell whose blood was in the wall, that if they cursed the snow, they were cursing him, in part. Some hated him for it. Some were grateful. Most did not think of him at all, save when winter bit particularly hard and their mothers muttered, "Trust the Wolf Emperor knows what he's about." In time, the dragons grew restless and flew back across the narrow sea, drawn by the compulsions of their own blood and fire. Valyria watched the Stark Empire with wary interest, sometimes sending emissaries to its court, sometimes plotting its weakening. But even they did not lightly speak of crossing the wall of blood and ice. The White Walkers did not forget. Behind the wall, in the howling dark, they paced. They touched the new ice that defied them and listened to the heartbeat thrumming through it. They shaped their dead and unshaped them. They watched the tiny flickers of men's lives beyond the barrier, rising and falling like sparks. They waited as winter always waits. They felt each time a Stark's blood spilled on the binding stone and tasted the salt and iron of it. They felt the wall shiver and steady, as centuries ticked by. One day they knew there would be a Stark who said no. A Stark who looked at the ledger of blood and bone and decided the price too high. One day, Winter's pact would crack again. But that day was not yet. For now, the Stark Empire stood. In Winterfell's Godswood, long after Brandon's bones had turned to dust, a woman sat beneath the heart tree, her cloak drawn around her, her hair shot with gray and white. Her name was Lyanna Stark, though tongue and ink called her Empress Frostheart. She had fought her own wars, signed her own treaties, watched her own sons and daughters bleed. Tonight, though, she listened. The snow fell thick and soft, muffling the world. The leaves of the weirwood stirred without wind. "You have done well," the familiar voice of the children whispered in her mind. For now is all we ever have," she said. Her breath smoked. "My grandsire bound us. My father bled for you. I will when the time comes. My children's children will. It will never be enough for you, will it?" "Never," they said gently, "but enough for the world." She leaned her head back against the tree. In her dreams that night, she saw a girl with dark hair and shadowed eyes, thousands of days away, standing atop a wall that gleamed like a frozen river under a strange, pale sun. The girl's hand was on the hilt of a sword made from broken pieces of others. Her breath smoked. "No more," the girl said, and Winter listened. Lyanna woke with tears on her cheeks and a strange, fierce hope in her chest. Every vow has an end, she thought, even ours. Until then, she rose, wrapped her cloak tighter, and went back to the work of holding an empire together. Outside, the ravens wheeled. The snow fell. The wall stood, not just a line of ice but the spine of a land, humming with the blood of wolves. And far to the north, beyond sight and sound and story, in the endless night, the White Walkers watched, waiting for the next crack in the world.